July 16, 1943. In the sweltering humidity of the Nakajima Aircraft Company's research facility near Tokyo, Chief Engineer Jiro Horikoshi wiped his brow as he studied the reports coming in from intelligence officers stationed across the Pacific. The Japanese aviation pioneer, renowned for designing the acclaimed Zero fighter, believed their current aircraft engines represented the pinnacle of engineering capability. "Our fighters will continue to dominate the skies," he assured his team of engineers. "American technology remains years behind our innovations." Little did he know that within months his entire understanding of aerial warfare would be turned upside down. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable tale of how Japan's finest engineering minds encountered American technological superiority that would fundamentally alter their understanding of modern warfare, and reveal how industrial might, rather than tactical brilliance, would ultimately decide the outcome in the Pacific. The first report seemed almost fantastical. Lieutenant Commander Heihachiro Abe, an experienced pilot with the Imperial Japanese Navy, had reported sighting a massive 4-engine bomber flying at altitudes his Zero fighter couldn't reach. The American aircraft traveled at approximately 11,000 meters, his report stated. "When I attempted to intercept, my engine began to sputter at 8,000 meters, and I was forced to abandon the pursuit." Similar accounts began filtering in from across the Pacific theater, describing enormous silver aircraft flying so high they appeared as mere specks, dropping their payloads with impunity while Japanese interceptors struggled to climb to their altitude. Major General Nobuo Tanaka of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service dismissed these early reports as exaggerations. "American bomber technology is rudimentary compared to German designs," he declared during a staff meeting in August 1943. "These are likely isolated incidents involving experimental aircraft or pilots, misjudging altitude in the heat of combat." The general, who had overseen the development of Japan's bomber fleet, found it inconceivable that American engineers had leapfrogged Japanese technology so dramatically. For the engineers at Nakajima, however, the reports were deeply troubling. Takeo Shimizu, a 35-year-old propulsion specialist who had studied in Germany before the war, recognized the strategic implications immediately. "If these reports are accurate," he told his colleagues, "then the Americans possess a bomber that can attack our homeland with minimal risk of interception." His concerns were initially met with skepticism from military officials who continued to place their faith in the maneuverability and combat prowess of Japanese fighter aircraft. As autumn arrived in 1943, intelligence reports became more specific. The mysterious aircraft had been identified as the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, a next-generation heavy bomber that represented a quantum leap beyond the B-17 Flying Fortress that was already bringing devastation to German cities. Technical specifications obtained through espionage channels suggested capabilities that seemed almost impossible to Japanese engineers: a pressurized cabin allowing crew to operate without oxygen masks at extreme altitudes, a central fire control system directing multiple remote-controlled gun turrets, and most significantly, 4 Wright R-3300 engines that generated over 2,000 horsepower each. In the private office of Naval Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, a classified briefing delivered the sobering news. "Our best estimates indicate the Americans have committed over $3 billion to the B-29 program," reported Captain Toshikazu Kase, head of intelligence assessment. "This equals the entire annual military budget of the Imperial Japanese Navy." The scale of investment was incomprehensible to the Japanese leadership, who operated under severe resource constraints and could never allocate such astronomical sums to a single weapons system. For Jiro Horikoshi and his engineering team, the reports represented a professional challenge unlike any they had faced before. "We must understand this technology," he instructed his department heads. "If we cannot match it, we must at least develop countermeasures." But how does one develop countermeasures against an aircraft that cannot be reached? This question haunted Japanese military planners throughout the closing months of 1943. Their opportunity came sooner than expected. On November 21, 1943, a damaged B-29, made an emergency landing on the Chinese airfield at Jinan, in territory controlled by Japanese forces. The crew managed to escape, but the aircraft remained largely intact despite their attempts to destroy it. Within hours, Japanese technical specialists were swarming over the downed bomber, beginning the most significant technical intelligence operation of the Pacific War. Colonel Satoshi Nakamura, head of the Imperial Japanese Army's Technical Research Institute, arrived at Jinan 3 days later to supervise the operation personally. "We have exactly 72 hours, he informed the assembled engineers. After that, the aircraft must be disassembled and transported to Japan for comprehensive analysis. Working around the clock, Japanese technicians photographed, measured, and documented every aspect of the super fortress. Particular attention was paid to the Wright R-3300 engines, the massive radial power plants that gave the B-29 its extraordinary performance. Takeo Shimizu was among the engineers dispatched to examine the engines. His initial report, sent by secure transmission to Tokyo, contained a single sentence that captured the essence of Japan's strategic predicament. "We are looking at technology that is at least 5 years ahead of our current capabilities." Back in Tokyo, the disassembled components of the B-29 arrived at the Nakajima Research Facility in early December 1943. Engineers worked feverishly to reverse engineer the critical systems, with particular focus on the engines. The Wright R-3300 represented everything the Japanese aviation industry lacked: precision manufacturing, advanced metallurgy, and the industrial capacity to mass-produce such complex machinery. Kenji Takahashi, a materials scientist at Nakajima, conducted an analysis of the engine's aluminum alloys. "The Americans are using aluminum with precise combinations of copper, manganese, and silicon that exceed our manufacturing capabilities," he reported. "These alloys maintain structural integrity at temperatures that would cause our engines to fail catastrophically." His team discovered that American metallurgists had developed alloys specifically engineered to withstand the extreme conditions of high-altitude flight. As the analysis continued, Japanese engineers made a series of discoveries that revealed the true extent of American technological superiority. The turbo superchargers on each engine represented a particularly painful revelation. These devices, essentially turbines driven by exhaust gases that compressed incoming air for the engines, allowed the B-29 to maintain power at altitudes where conventional aircraft engines became starved of oxygen. "The precision engineering in these turbo superchargers is beyond anything in our current production capability," noted Hiroshi Tanaka, a turbine specialist. "The impeller blades are cast from special steel alloys and balanced to tolerances measured in thousandths of a millimeter. Such precision manufacturing required specialized equipment that simply did not exist in Japan's industrial base." The American engine's fuel injection system presented another sobering discovery. Rather than the carburetors used in Japanese aircraft engines, which functioned poorly at high altitudes and during negative G maneuvers, the Wright R-3300 used a direct fuel injection system that delivered precisely metered fuel regardless of aircraft attitude or altitude. "This system alone gives their aircraft an enormous tactical advantage," observed Lieutenant Commander Yoshiro Matsuda, a naval aviator assigned to the analysis team. As January 1944 arrived, the full technical report on the B-29 was presented to a joint Army-Navy committee headed by General Takeo Yasuda. The findings painted a devastating picture of technological inferiority. "The Wright engines represent not merely an incremental improvement, but a fundamental leap forward in aviation technology," the report concluded. "With our current industrial infrastructure, we cannot hope to produce engines of comparable performance within the foreseeable future." The report detailed specific technical advantages that collectively explained the B-29's ability to operate beyond the reach of Japanese defenders. The 4 engines generated a combined 8,200 horsepower, allowing the massive aircraft to reach altitudes exceeding 10,000 meters. The fuel injection system and turbo superchargers maintained power at altitudes where Japanese fighter engines produced less than 50% of their rated output. Most critically, the engine cooling systems utilized cutting-edge designs that prevented overheating, despite the enormous power output. For Major General Korechika Anami, the newly appointed head of military aviation development, the report represented nothing less than a crisis. "We are not simply facing a superior aircraft," he told his staff. "We are confronting the full industrial might of America, translated into technological terms. The implications extended far beyond aviation. The same industrial capacity that produced the sophisticated engines was simultaneously manufacturing tanks, ships, and artillery in quantities Japan could never match." Jiro Horikoshi's reaction to the findings reflected the professional respect one engineer holds for the work of another. "The Americans have achieved something remarkable," he acknowledged. "They have combined theoretical understanding with practical manufacturing capability to produce an engine that redefines the possibilities of aerial warfare." For Horikoshi, whose Zero fighter emphasized maneuverability and range over speed and altitude, the B-29 represented a fundamentally different philosophy of aircraft design. At the Nakajima factory, engineers attempted to modify existing engines to improve high-altitude performance. The results were discouraging. "We can make incremental improvements," reported Takeo Shimizu after weeks of testing. "But without the manufacturing capability to produce turbo superchargers comparable to the American models, we cannot close the performance gap." Similar efforts at other Japanese aircraft manufacturers yielded equally disappointing results. As the technical analysis continued into February 1944, a more profound realization began to emerge among Japanese military leaders. The B-29 was not merely a superior aircraft, it was the product of an industrial system operating on a scale Japan could not comprehend, let alone match. "The Americans are not producing these engines by the dozens or even hundreds," noted Colonel Nakamura after reviewing intelligence estimates. "They are manufacturing them by the thousands." Indeed, the scale of American production capability represented the most shocking aspect of the B-29 program. By early 1944, Wright Aeronautical was producing over 1,000 R-3300 engines per month, more than Japan's entire aviation industry could manufacture across all engine types combined. The Boeing assembly lines were delivering new superfortresses at an ever-increasing rate, with production scheduled to exceed 100 aircraft per month by mid-year. Lieutenant General Torashiro Kawabe, Deputy Chief of the Imperial Japanese Army General Staff, summarized the strategic implications in a confidential memorandum to Prime Minister Hideki Tojo. "The technical superiority of American aircraft, particularly the B-29, represents not merely a tactical challenge but a strategic crisis," he wrote. "We must recognize that Japan's industrial capacity cannot match that of the United States, regardless of the skill or dedication of our workforce." For the engineers who had examined the captured engine, the experience had transformed their understanding of modern warfare. "I used to believe that Japanese spirit and ingenuity could overcome material disadvantages," Takeo Shimizu later confided to a colleague. "After seeing the B-29 engine, I realized that no amount of spirit can compensate for such a vast technological gap." The technical superiority of the B-29 engine manifested in numerous specific details that collectively created an unbridgeable advantage. The engine's forged crankshaft, manufactured from a single piece of specially formulated steel, could withstand stresses far beyond the capabilities of Japanese engines. The cylinder heads featured sodium-cooled exhaust valves, allowing sustained operation at higher temperatures. Even the spark plugs incorporated innovations in ceramic insulators that prevented fouling at high altitudes. Professor Kotaro Hashimoto of Tokyo Imperial University, who participated in the analysis of the engine's metallurgical properties, identified another critical advantage. "The Americans are using aluminum alloys with specific heat treatment processes that we cannot replicate with our current technology," he reported. "These materials maintain structural integrity under conditions that would cause our alloys to fail." As spring 1944 approached, Japanese military leaders faced the uncomfortable task of developing countermeasures against an opponent that could operate beyond their reach. Major General Nobuo Tanaka, who had initially dismissed reports of the B-29's capabilities, now led the effort to develop tactical responses. Since we cannot match their altitude capability, we must adopt alternative approaches, he told a conference of fighter unit commanders in March 1944. These alternative approaches increasingly reflected desperation rather than tactical innovation. Japanese fighter pilots were instructed to climb to their service ceiling and then execute ramming attacks against the superfortresses, sacrificing themselves to bring down a single bomber. Anti-aircraft batteries were repositioned to higher elevations, despite the reduced effectiveness of their fire at extreme ranges. Civilian observation posts were established throughout the home islands to provide early warning of approaching formations. The B-29's technological advantage became painfully apparent when the strategic bombing campaign against the Japanese home islands began in earnest during June 1944. Flying from bases in the Mariana Islands, superfortress formations operated at altitudes beyond the effective reach of most Japanese fighters. The few interceptors that managed to climb to engagement altitude found their engines starved for power, while the American bombers continued to operate at peak efficiency. Captain Teruo Miyashita, a veteran Zero pilot with the 201st Naval Air Group, described the frustration of attempting to intercept the high-flying bombers. "We would begin our climb immediately upon receiving warning of an approaching formation," he recalled. "By the time we reached 8,000 meters, our engines were struggling and our rate of climb had slowed to a crawl. The B-29s, clearly visible above us, continued on their course undisturbed. For the citizens of Japan's industrial cities, the consequences of this technological disparity became increasingly devastating. High-altitude precision bombing, conducted with minimal interference from Japanese defenses, systematically targeted the nation's manufacturing capacity. The same factories that struggled to match American engine technology now faced destruction from aircraft, whose superiority they had themselves confirmed. As summer turned to autumn in 1944, Japanese engineers continued their desperate efforts to close the technology gap. At the Nakajima facility, Jiro Horikoshi's team worked to develop an engine capable of powering a high-altitude interceptor, specifically designed to counter the B-29 threat. The result was the Nakajima Kika, Japan's first jet-powered aircraft, heavily influenced by German designs but plagued by material shortages and manufacturing difficulties. Takeo Shimizu, now leading the high-altitude engine development program, found himself confronting the fundamental limitations of Japan's industrial base. "We understand the theoretical principles behind the American engines," he explained to General Anami during a progress review. "What we lack is not knowledge, but the precision manufacturing capability and raw materials to translate that knowledge into production." This realization, that understanding the principles behind enemy technology did not translate into the ability to replicate it, represented a profound shift in Japanese military thinking. Throughout the early years of the war, Japanese leaders had maintained a deep conviction that spiritual factors and tactical brilliance could overcome material disadvantages. The B-29 engine, with its integration of advanced metallurgy, precision manufacturing, and theoretical aerodynamics, demonstrated the fatal flaw in that reasoning. By late 1944, as B-29 raids against Japanese cities intensified, the technical analysis teams at Nakajima had completed their comprehensive evaluation of the Wright R3300 engine. Their final report, running to over 300 pages of technical specifications, performance data, and manufacturing analysis, represented the most detailed examination of American aviation technology conducted during the war. Its conclusions were unsparing. The technological gap between Japanese and American aircraft engines cannot be closed under current conditions, the report stated. Without access to comparable raw materials, precision manufacturing equipment, and production capacity, Japan cannot produce engines with comparable performance regardless of engineering expertise. The report estimated that developing comparable technology would require at least 5 years of concentrated effort, assuming resources that Japan simply did not possess. For Lieutenant General Kawabe, the implications extended far beyond the immediate challenge of defending against high-altitude bombers. The B-29 engine represents the fundamental reality of this conflict, he wrote in a private assessment for the General Staff. We are not merely fighting the American military, we are fighting the entire American industrial system, a system whose productive capacity exceeds our own by a factor of 10 or more. The story of the Japanese examination of the B-29 engine is more than a tale of technological disparity. It is a case study in how material factors ultimately determine military outcomes despite tactical brilliance or fighting spirit. The Japanese engineers who disassembled the Wright R-3300 engines were among the most talented aviation specialists in the world, men who had designed the Zero fighter that had dominated the skies in the early years of the war. Their inability to match American engine technology, despite understanding its principles, revealed the limitations of expertise without industrial capacity. As 1945 began, the consequences of this technological gap became increasingly apparent. B-29 formations now operated almost with impunity over Japanese territory, systematically reducing the nation's industrial capacity, while Japanese defenders struggled to mount effective opposition. The disparity in engine performance that Takeo Shimizu and his colleagues had identified became a metaphor for the broader strategic situation, Japan fighting with increasingly limited resources against an opponent whose productive capacity seemed limitless. For Jiro Horikoshi, who had begun the war confident in the superiority of Japanese aircraft design, the experience proved transformative. Engineering is not merely about understanding principles, he later wrote. It is about the application of those principles within the constraints of available materials, manufacturing capabilities, and industrial capacity. The B-29 engine had demonstrated that advanced theoretical understanding could not compensate for fundamental limitations in production capability. The captured engine components remained at the Nakajima facility until March 1945, when intensified bombing forced the evacuation of critical research materials to a remote location in northern Japan. By then, the technical insights gained from the examination had been rendered largely irrelevant by the deteriorating strategic situation. Japan lacked not only the capability to produce comparable engines, but increasingly the basic industrial infrastructure to manufacture aircraft of any type. Major Yukio Seki, who had been assigned to the Countermeasures Division of the Army Air Service, summarized the situation in a remarkably candid assessment. "We began this war believing that spiritual strength could overcome material weakness." He noted in a report that never reached his superiors, as he was reassigned to lead a special attack unit. The B-29 has demonstrated that beyond a certain point, no amount of spirit can overcome technological inferiority. The examination of the B-29 engine had revealed not just technical specifications, but the underlying philosophy of American industrial warfare. While Japanese aircraft design emphasized maneuverability, range, and pilot skill, American approach prioritized standardization, reliability, and overwhelming productive capacity. The Wright R-3300 engines, with their modular design and interchangeable components, were engineered not just for performance, but for mass production. Professor Hashimoto, reflecting on the metallurgical aspects of the engine, identified this fundamental difference in approach. Japanese engineers designed for the theoretical maximum performance, accepting maintenance difficulties as the price of excellence, he observed. The American engine is designed with maintenance and production efficiency as primary considerations, achieving excellence through industrial capacity rather than individualized craftsmanship. As the strategic bombing campaign intensified through the spring of 1945, the personnel who had participated in the examination of the B-29 engine found themselves dispersed across various last-ditch development efforts. Takeo Shimizu was reassigned to a project attempting to develop simple rocket interceptors that could reach the altitude of the American bombers. Kenji Takahashi joined a team working on ceramic substitute materials as metal supplies became increasingly scarce. For these engineers, the irony was inescapable. Having confirmed that Japan could not match American engine technology, they now worked on increasingly desperate alternatives, while the factories that might have produced their designs were systematically destroyed by the very aircraft they had studied. The technological gap they had identified had become a self-reinforcing cycle. American industrial superiority, producing weapons that further extended that superiority, by destroying Japan's remaining productive capacity. In a bunker beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, Emperor Hirohito received a briefing on air defense capabilities in June 1945. The presentation included technical details drawn from the examination of the captured B-29, explained in terms accessible to the emperor, who had studied marine biology at Tokyo Imperial University. According to witnesses present, the emperor asked a single question after the technical explanation: if their engines allow them to fly beyond our reach, and we cannot build comparable engines, how are we to defend ourselves? The question encapsulated the strategic dilemma that Japan faced in the final months of the war. The technological superiority of American aircraft, confirmed by Japanese engineers' own examination, had created a situation in which conventional defense had become virtually impossible. The captured B-29 engine, still stored in a research facility in northern Japan, stood as physical evidence of an industrial gap that could not be closed. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the attack on Pearl Harbor and now served on the Imperial Navy General Staff, later reflected on the psychological impact of the B-29's technological superiority. The appearance of their superfortress changed something fundamental in our understanding of the war, he wrote. Before, we believed that courage and skill could overcome material advantages. After witnessing their bombers operating beyond our reach, that belief became impossible to maintain. The Wright R-3300 engine represented more than just a superior power plant. It embodied an approach to warfare that prioritized industrial capacity over individual heroism. Each engine required approximately 5,000 precision-manufactured components produced to tolerances that Japanese industry could not consistently achieve. More significantly, American factories could produce these complex engines in quantities that Japanese commanders found almost incomprehensible. By July 1945, as conventional air defenses proved increasingly ineffective, Japanese military leaders turned to tactics that required no technological sophistication. Special attack units, the infamous kamikaze, represented the ultimate expression of the belief that spiritual factors could overcome material superiority. Yet even these desperate measures proved increasingly ineffective against the B-29s, operating at altitudes beyond the reach of many purpose-built attack aircraft. For the engineers who had examined the captured engine, the situation represented a professional tragedy. They possessed the theoretical understanding to appreciate American technological achievements, but lacked the industrial infrastructure to translate that understanding into competitive designs. Takeo Shimizu, in his final report before the Nakajima facility was largely destroyed in a May 1945 raid, captured this frustration. We know what needs to be done but lack the means to do it. The technological gap identified through the examination of the B-29 engine ultimately reflected deeper disparities between the opposing nations. American industrial capacity in 1944 exceeded Japan's by a factor of 10 or more. American aircraft factories operated around the clock, producing engines, airframes, and components in quantities that Japanese intelligence officers initially dismissed as propaganda. The Wright Aeronautical Corporation alone produced more aircraft engines per month than the entire Japanese aviation industry combined. In the final weeks of the war, as atomic weapons demonstrated yet another dimension of American technological superiority, the lessons of the B-29 engine examination acquired a broader significance. Japanese military leaders, contemplating the transition from wartime to peacetime, recognized that national reconstruction would require a fundamental reassessment of the relationship between technology, industry, and national power. Jiro Horikoshi, who survived the war to become a leading figure in Japan's post-war aviation industry, later identified the examination of the B-29 engine as a turning point in his understanding of industrial competition. Before seeing the American engine, I believed that individual genius could overcome industrial limitations, he wrote. Afterward, I understood that true innovation requires both the creative spark and the industrial capacity to translate that spark into reality. The legacy of the B-29 engine examination extended well beyond the immediate military context. In the post-war years, Japanese industrial policy reflected the lessons learned from the painful recognition of technological inferiority. The emphasis on precision manufacturing, quality control, and continuous improvement that characterized Japan's economic resurgence had roots in the wartime recognition of American productive superiority. Takeo Shimizu, who joined Mitsubishi Heavy Industries after the war, became an advocate for the transformation of Japanese manufacturing. "We must learn from our examination of American technology," he told a conference of industrial leaders in 1951. Not merely to copy their designs, but to understand the manufacturing philosophy that made such designs possible on an industrial scale. The captured B-29 engine, almost forgotten in the chaos of surrender and occupation, had delivered a message that transcended the immediate military situation. It demonstrated that in modern industrial warfare, productive capacity translated directly into technological superiority, which in turn determined strategic outcomes regardless of tactical brilliance or fighting spirit. For the engineers who had disassembled the Wright R3300, measuring its components and analyzing its materials, the experience had permanently altered their understanding of their profession. Engineering was not merely about designing superior machines in theoretical terms, it was about creating machines that could be manufactured in quantity with the available industrial infrastructure. The most brilliant design was worthless without the capacity to produce it. Perhaps the most profound impact of the B-29 engine examination came not during the war, but in the decades that followed. The Japanese engineers, who had confirmed their nation's technological inferiority, became the architects of its industrial resurgence. The precision manufacturing techniques they had observed in the American engine became standard practice in Japanese industry, eventually allowing Japanese companies to challenge and, in some sectors, surpass their American counterparts. Kenji Takahashi, whose analysis of the engine's metallurgical properties had revealed the sophistication of American materials science, established a research institute dedicated to advancing Japan's capabilities in high-performance alloys. By the 1960s, Japanese manufacturers had not only matched, but in some cases exceeded the material specifications of their American counterparts, producing steel, aluminum, and titanium alloys of exceptional quality. The Wright R3300 engine, studied with such care by Japanese engineers in 1943, represented the high-water mark of piston engine design. Within a decade, jet engines would render such power plants obsolete for military applications. Yet the lessons learned from the examination of the B-29 engine about precision manufacturing, materials science, and industrial capacity remained relevant long after the technology itself had been superseded. In the final analysis, the story of the Japanese examination of the B-29 engine illustrates a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Technological superiority flows from industrial capacity, not from individual brilliance or fighting spirit. The Japanese engineers who disassembled the captured engine were confronted not merely with superior design, but with the reality of American productive might, translated into technological terms. Their recognition of this reality, painful as it was, eventually contributed to Japan's post-war transformation from a nation that prioritized military spirit over industrial capacity to one that achieved economic success through precision manufacturing and technological innovation. The lessons of the B-29 engine examination thus came full circle. The very engineers who had confirmed Japan's wartime technological inferiority became instrumental in building its post-war industrial strength, applying the insights gained from their study of American engines to create a new generation of Japanese products known for their precision, reliability, and technological sophistication. In this transformation lay perhaps the most significant legacy of their wartime technical analysis: the recognition that true technological superiority requires not merely understanding, but the industrial capacity to translate that understanding into reality. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.